Welcome to a special edition of Informed Dissent for Tuesday, May 19th, 2026. What you are about to hear was recorded inside of a continuing medical education session at the 2026 American Psychiatric Association annual meeting in San Francisco. This session was designated in person only. It was not made available to virtual attendees. It was not broadcast beyond this room. We received this audio and we have verified its authenticity. We are releasing it in full with no edits to content. The only alteration made was to audio quality. We have done what we could to make it as clear and as audible as possible. What you hear is what was said. We want to be direct about why we are doing this. CME sessions are not private conversations. They are credentialing events. The content that is delivered in these rooms travels directly into clinical practice, into the offices where patients sit, in the decisions being made about children and adolescents, into the testimony being offered in courtrooms and legislative hearings. The public, patients, parents, and policymakers being asked to legislate in this space have a legitimate interest in knowing what the American Psychiatric Association is teaching its practitioners behind closed doors. This session was not made available to the public. It was not made available to most of the psychiatrists attending the same conference. Yet it was offered for CME credit to those physically present in the room. We believe that that designation does not make it private. It makes it more urgent to release. Dr. Jack Drescher has been one of the most influential figures in America Psychiatric's approach to gender and sexuality for decades. He was centrally involved in the revision of the DSM that removed gender identity disorder as a diagnosis and replaced it with gender dysphoria. That framework now governs clinical practice in the area, and it bears his fingerprints. What he chairs in a CME session is not incidental to that record. It is continuous with it. We believe in transparency. We believe patients deserve to know what is being said in their name. We believe parents deserve to know what clinicians treating their children are being taught. And we believe that anyone with the power to make or sustain policy in this area has an obligation to hear it directly. So we're not going to summarize it, and we're not going to interpret it for you. We are simply going to let you hear it. What follows is the full audio from session 1240 at the 2026 American Psychiatric Association's annual meeting. A continuing education session titled Transgender Psychiatrists Speak. Reflections from training, patient care, and professional practice. This session ran from 1:30 to 3 p.m. Pacific time in room 202 of the Moscone Center in San Francisco. It was chaired by Dr. Jack Drescher, presented by Dr. Lana Irons, Dr. Jack Pula, Dr. Tobias Murphy, and Dr. Jami Woods. This session was not recorded for virtual attendees. You were not meant to hear this, but now you will.
Hi, I'm from New York City. I'm a clinical professor of psychiatry at Pula University. I actually didn't get your introduction for that panel. We did all this planning. So I'll introduce ourselves. And so I thought we'd start with a little introduction about this panel. For those, there's a lot of young faces here, which is nice, but so about 1970s, when before I was in medical school even, the APA had demonstrations going on outside. You've all seen the Scientologists, but back in 1970, when the APA was in San Francisco, there were demonstrations not only against APA because for a variety of reasons, but there were also disruptions of our meeting. So historically what happened was that, we had a riot in New York City called Stonewall. And after the Stonewall riots, you had although there had been gay rights organizations up to that time, which called themselves homophobe groups, they were all very polite. Gay demonstrators used to sort of march with very nice signs, wearing very conservative clothing, saying, please give us our rights. But the 1960s saw anti-war demonstrations, women's lib demonstrations, the civil rights movement, and demonstrations got a little bit headier. So after the Stonewall riots in New York, the gay rights movement became newly energized and decided that psychiatry was the enemy of gay people, and that the main enemy of gay people was the diagnosis of homosexuality in what was then the DSM-2. So they came to our meeting in San Francisco. I wasn't here yet in San Francisco with the APA yet, but they came to the APA meeting and they disrupted the meeting. Somebody would come up here. They told the doctors, we're going to disrupt your meeting, a meeting about how to cure homosexuality. And they said, you're going to listen to us. And so they got APA's attention. And so the next year, APA had a symposium at I think the meeting was in Hawaii that year, or Dallas, Hawaii, those 2 years, not sure. Anyway, and so the next year, there was a symposium of gay activists who were not psychiatric patients talking to the psychiatrists in the audience about the negative impact, the adverse impact of their diagnosis on gay people. And apparently this was a very successful panel. One of the speakers, Ron Gold, did a talk, said, stop it, you're making me sick. And so the following year they said, why don't you guys come back? And so one of the activists, Kayla Hussein, had this idea. She said, well, what if we had a gay psychiatrist on the panel? And so this is 1972, and the problem in 1972 is that homosexuality was illegal in most US states, and that if you were a gay physician, you could lose your license, you would probably lose your practice, your academic position. So they finally did find somebody who was willing to appear in person, but only if you could do so in disguise. Why can't this be? No? I'm a Mac user. And so this is what an openly gay psychiatrist looks like in 1972. Dr. John Fryer, he's with Barbara Giddings and Frank Hammond, two of the activists who helped organize the protests against APA. He's wearing a Richard Nixon Halloween mask, a fright wig, an oversized tuxedo, and he's using a voice disguising microphone. And what he's doing is he's saying to the people in the audience, his fellow psychiatrists, why he's there and why he has to be in disguise. And this is part of his speech. I'm a homosexual, I'm a psychiatrist. I, like most of you in this room, am a member of the APA and I'm proud of that membership. And this is Dr. Fryer without his disguise on. He passed away. He came out as Dr. Anonymous in the 1990s and then he came back a few years later. And basically, this is probably the first time that many of the psychiatrists in the room had ever met an openly gay person in any form. That the only homosexuals, in quotation marks, they ever met were probably in their offices. And so it was a very powerful, dramatic moment in the decision, finally in 1973, to remove the diagnosis of homosexuality from the DSM. So with that in mind, we're living in interesting times, which of course is meant to be a curse. We live in interesting times, and people ask me, how am I doing? And I said, well, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? But So some of us, Jack Pula, who you're going to meet, and I were on a panel about a year ago, which was not about this subject, but Jack and one of my colleagues from the William Allen White Institute, Willow France, were doing a panel, and it was very powerful impact on the audience that, trans psychiatrists, psychoanalysts were speaking up about their day-to-day experiences. So we thought this would not be a bad idea to do it. We're doing a little bit of a traveling road show. And so we decided to do this one here at the APA. We've been doing them we have grand rounds. We've been getting invites to talk to people because we feel that it's very hard to educate the public on these issues having to do with gender because most of the people in the field don't know that much about it. This is my usual question. How many of you in the audience feel you've gotten good training in issues related to gender and sexuality in your professional career? Could you raise your hand? You're a minority, okay? So this is, and the public doesn't know this. So we think it's a good idea to start with us before we can go out and educate everybody else. So with that in mind, I'll introduce our first, you know how to do that? We have a video. One of our presenters is going to be here, Jami Woods. And
Hello, I'm Dr. Jami Woods. I'm a psychiatrist in private practice in Palm Springs. Hello, I'm Dr. Jami Woods.
sorry, everyone. Why don't you start then? Okay, that's good.
Sorry, everyone's psychiatrist, not IT specialist.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jami Woods. I'm a in Palm Springs, and I want to talk to you guys today about gender-affirming treatments for our gender-expansive and transgender individuals in our practice. The landscape has gotten quite darker over the course of the past couple of years. This was a presidential executive order that was issued on January 20th of 2025. It was one of about 200 presidential actions that the current president signed that day, and one of them was defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. It simply states that there are only two sexes, male and female, which really essentially eliminates 1.5 intersex people in the United States who really were born that way too as well. In fact, within a day, the State Department replaced LGBTQI plus with just LGB. So the erasure, not only for the intersex people began just immediately, but also for transgender people too as well. I looked up the website yesterday and I wanted to see if it was still that way. And actually it's gotten worse. Now they've taken the bisexual people out. So they've eliminated and erased, that's bisexual erasure, 5 million bisexual people, 1 million trans people, and 1.5 million intersex people. And regrettably, you can't legislate the future because the future is coming. If you look at the graph right here, I'm 71 years old. The odds of me being transgender is about 1 in 300. However, if you look at the students and the residents that I taught as recently as last year, these are our Gen Zs, it's not 0.3%, it's 5%. 1 out of every 20 young people identify as a gender other than the woman they were assigned at birth. And that is climbing asymptotically too as well. And the interesting thing is about 2/3 of those young people have actually thrown the binary away entirely. They are non-binary. At the end of the day, they feel that masculinity and femininity are social constructs too as well. So there's more of us coming down the road, and a lot of us are going to end up with they, them pronouns too as well. For some reason, there's an association between an autism spectrum disorder and gender dysphoria. Is it because autistic people got a different set of testosterone during the pregnancy, or maybe the timing was off, or maybe autistic people just don't worry as much about what society thinks about them? But in my case, I've treated about 200 trans and gender expansive folks, and probably about 25% of them would meet the criteria for dual diagnosis in autism spectrum disorder. Oh, well, you're a trans girl, so you must be interested in boys. No, you can't predict my sexual proclivity based on my gender identity any more than you can a cis girl. But this is the reality of the situation right here. About 1/3 of us are trans guys, about 1/3 of us are trans girls, and about 1/3 of us identify as non-binary too as well. So it's kind of spread. You don't usually see the trans guys very much. They're out there. They just typically have 100% passing privilege when that beard comes in, so you don't really recognize them. Trans girls, especially the ones that don't have passing privilege, they're the ones that you kind of see walking around on the street too as well. So that's what your vision of them is. But please know, we're just trans girls are just one slice of a big pie too as well. As I said earlier, so if you're a trans girl, you must be attracted. No, you can't predict that. However, there are some rough metrics which can help illustrate this. About half of trans people are bisexual or pansexual. We don't really care what's below your waist. We care more about what's above your waist too as well. So I include pansexual because pansexual means that you're sexually attracted to non-binary people as addition to, just, men or women too as well. About 1/4 of us are heterosexual and about 1/4 of us are homosexual too as well. So if I was a trans lesbian, I would be part of the group that would be in the gay, lesbian, same gender. However, if I'm a trans girl and I'm only attracted to guys, then I'd be in that 1/4 pie square that's heterosexual. For me, I'm demisexual, but I really don't care what your sex is, so I'm part of that broad 50% right there. I mean, the terminology can seem overwhelming. Gender dysphoria, gender expression, gender fluid, gender identity, gender nonconforming, gender queer, gender transition. How in the world are we going to be able to make sense of this? Well, I always talk about the genderbread person, which talks about our 5 different identities. And our first identity is our gender identity. And that starts up here. If I identify as a trans woman, it does not make any difference how many hormones I'm on or any of them. It doesn't make any difference how many surgeries I have. If I identify up here as trans, I am trans. Now, how do you express that gender? Well, for the first 63 years of my life, I expressed male because I was trying to identify as a man, but just wasn't making it. But for the last 9 years, I've expressed female. And of course, we all have a different identity, and that was our sex assigned at birth. I was assigned male at birth. Well, if you're a trans girl, so you must be sexually attracted to blah, blah, blah. No, you can't make that prediction any more with me than you can with a cis girl. So, very asexual, demisexual for me. Who are you romantically attracted to? Who can you fall in love with? Well, for me, it's men and women, non-binary people. So no big deal there. So there's our gender identity, how we express our gender, our biological sex assigned at birth. Who would we like to have sex with? Who would we like to get married to? And that's the gender-bread person. Now, let's talk about some mental health considerations too as well. And we really want to take a trauma-informed approach because there's a very high rate of violence, discrimination, and rejection in our community. Large amount of microaggressions, healthcare stigma. That occurs very, very frequently. It's not enough for you as a psychiatrist or mental health practitioner to know and ask for my pronouns. But if your front office staff doesn't do it, that's still a microaggression, and it's going to sting just as bad. About 13% of us are couch surfers. We're homeless at any given point in time, secondary to community and family rejection. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, there's the intersectionality of race, physical disability, socioeconomic status, unsupporting partners. About 3/4 of divorces in my age group, when a person transitions, about 3/4 of the time the marriage doesn't succeed. Even with 18-year-olds, about half the marriages don't succeed. Unsupporting employers, that's definitely true. I've gotten fired by a lot of people. And an unsupporting legal system too as well. I was quoting Deuteronomy 22 verse 5 on the witness stand by Judge Joe Day Jenkins, who was the judge at the 5th Chancery Court in Shelby County, Tennessee. He told me I was an abomination to the Lord thy God, and also threatened me with criminal contempt of court if I bought a 6-pack of women's panties. That's 10 days in jail on the men's unit. Undateable. Recent studies have shown that only about 1.7% of us are actually considered dateable by cisgender people too as well. Most important thing that you can do is get our pronouns right. If you don't know, ask. It's okay. You're not going to embarrass us. You're going to say that you care enough about me by asking about my pronouns to say that, that means a whole lot to me. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I'm glad you asked. That shows me that you care enough. So whether it's she, her, hers, he, him, he, she, they, he, they, them, theirs, we all deserve the same care. Oh, and by the way, when you are evaluating that patient also ask about depression too. Of course, you're going to do that, but this is really a key if you're having a gender expansive or trans person. Is the depression due to the gender dysphoria, or is it due to something else? I had a patient that came in, and a trans guy, and he's been on testosterone for 10 years, and he's very happy. He doesn't need help with his transition. He needed help with his OCD, so I was just treating for his obsessive compulsive disorder. However, I have another patient, and I have a lot of patients that are coming in, and the gender dysphoria is driving the depression. And if you have a 41% attempt suicide rate, but if you had a medical intervention that could reduce your suicidal ideations by as much as 73%, then I think that would be an incredibly important thing to have too as well. So let me repeat that. If dysphoria is driving the depression, and ask that patient, well, what would help relieve your dysphoria? In many cases, they'll say, I need hormones too as well. But whether it's gender-forming care, whether it's surgery, whether it's supportive care, whether it is hormones, it can be associated with as much as a 73% lower risk of self-harm. But if you look over here at the very bottom of it, if you didn't get gender-affirming care, then your depressive symptoms and suicidality were 2 to 3-fold higher than baseline levels at 3 and 6 months for follow-up. So the coming out process for transgender people can be more challenging than it is for just regular lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, because you guys don't have to out yourselves all the time. Guys, if you're gay, you don't have to wear those good-fitting shirts, those really smart socks and everything like that. You don't have to do that. And ladies, you don't have to drive around in those Subarus. You don't have to walk around with those chacos. Of course, I have a pair of chacos too as well. But the point is, you can go stealth. So you can, you don't have to, announce it. However, for us who are transitioning, we have to come out to people that we interact with unless we just choose to live totally in stealth as well. So it's a little bit harder for the trans folks, obviously. Again, unsuspecting partners, employers, legal system, and being undateable too as well. What can we do? Well, the primary thing that we can do as mental health professionals is help our gender expansive and trans people accept their identity as being real and genuine and authentic, and affirm their choice, because when they're coming out, they're some of the most courageous people around. And if you don't want to do surgery, and if you don't want to do hormones, you can help them with our social transition too as well. Find out who in the community is going to do our nails, but is not going to be transphobic. What are the drugstores where we can get our hormones filled at? Who are the doctors that we can go to for gender-affirming hormone therapy? These are all parts of things. You can tell them where to find a transgender navigator in your city. So there's a lot of ways that you can do to help us explore and accept our gender identity, help us with that coming out process, help us with the social transition. We've got a lot of PTSD and a lot of generalized anxiety disorders, so there's going to be some SSRIs in our future too as well. And it is not beyond the scope of anybody that's watching this presentation to be able to do world-class gender-affirming hormone therapy. Finally, I just want to end on this note. November 20th is Transgender Day of Remembrance. This is the day that we say their names. Homicide rates have climbed pretty steadily since 2016 too as well. So these are the people that pay the ultimate price for their authenticity. I want to thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to kind of open up things and talk a little bit about some of the challenges and some of the hopes of our transgender people. Thanks for having me.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jack Pula. I'm a psychiatrist in New York, psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, and also transgender. That's why I'm here. And I'm glad that you're all here and interested. It looks like a pretty full crowd today. I'm really not technologically savvy. Is it?
That's right.
So this is my sixth panel that I've done in the past year, and I started with Jack Drescher a year ago at a psychoanalytic conference. I hadn't given a talk in a long time because I don't particularly like giving these kinds of talks, but it felt like the right thing to do with all the bad things happening in the country. I wanted to do something proactive, so we've been doing this with other colleagues who are also transgender. And one of the things that really kind of catalyzed me was that I was thinking about leaving the country, and I was afraid about what was going on and my friends and the patients, so I just thought, this is the time to speak out. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story. I used to work in a CPAP for 5 years, in 2010 to 2014. I was part-time attending there while I was starting a private practice. And I came out as a transgender around 2011. And I had this very strange experience of being treated really well in the CPAP by the administrators and the psychiatrists there, residents. But in the Psychoanalytic Institute, I ran into a lot of problems. So there was this dual experience of acceptance and rejection that was quite disturbing. I'll tell you a little bit more. one of the things that happened in the CPAP when I came out, I mean, people were like very excited about it, and I think they may have even given me cake or something like that. And I wrote a letter, announcing it, and I got all this great feedback. And then the director of the department, the chair of the department, made sure that the insurance coverage would cover my medical expenses, and then opened that up to the whole hospital. So it felt like this, huge welcome. But at the Psychoanalytic Center, I was probably in maybe my second year, when I announced I was transgender and I was going to transition, and they tried to send me on a leave of absence, just sort of, they just told me that's what was going to happen, and it turned into a very big crisis in my life. I was able to fight back, and I had a lot of allies at the center who really stood by me and helped me. There was also a policy at the university, like an anti-discrimination policy, so the university had my back as well, and we were able to go through a mediation process. Ultimately, things worked out well, but it did leave me with this lingering trauma, and it really kind of tore at my confidence at the time. That's probably one of the reasons why I ended up stopping, giving these types of talks at some point, because it was just too much overload. So I have a private practice in New York. I'm mostly remote now since COVID. I do go into the city a couple times a month. I see a lot of LGBT patients, young adults, midlifers. I have some seniors, and I see a lot of doctors, med students, residents, undergrads, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And I'm always constantly trying to balance things, which I know all of you know is kind of impossible to do in our profession, but it's really important. So when I came out in 2011, it was a time of growth, expansion in the rights for trans people. There was a lot of hope and extension of rights. Insurance was covering procedures, and it was just like a little bit of a golden age there for a moment. And I felt really comfortable in that, and a lot of my patients started transitioning then and had very good experiences. Things have since turned around, as you know, unfortunately. WPATH, the World Professional Association for Trans Health, has a standard of care number 7 from 2011 and standard of care number 8 in 2022, and that was sort of accepted as the gold standard, whereas now WPATH is being investigated by the government, so things have really gotten turned on their head. And I think with the election and all the turmoil, the COVID epidemic, January 6th, just a lot of the political things that were happening, it was like riding, a roller coaster, and I was riding that along with my patients. And so I feel like, from my patients' perspective, things have just kind of gone down and down and down since then. So at the time, I don't want to paint the picture to be too rosy, because there was a lot of a lack of information, a lack of education in psychiatry and medicine, but there seemed like more of an opening, more of a willingness to invite speakers, and I think there was more funding for it, frankly, and people were not getting censored or threatened by the government at the time. So those things have started to really close down. One of the positive aspects of the COVID epidemic for me was I got to start doing remote work, and I was able to move out of New York City and into a house and do remote work from there, and that has its positives and its negatives. So I think during this time also there was a lot more happening on the internet, a lot of animus towards trans people, a lot of polarization. I'm sure you all remember that. And I think right-wing movements really started to target trans people at this time. And I think that the playbook started around then to try to make it illegal try to make trans-affirming care illegal for youth and maybe perhaps even for adults. And we've always had skeptics around for eons who don't like people who are gendered differently. This has been the case for hundreds of years. But really, there's been this sharp rise in really questioning your right to exist, and there's just a lot more exposure now because of the internet and because of this information world that we're in, where news spreads so quickly, accusations and false information get propagated so quickly that it's really become a much more dangerous situation. So some of the false labeling and rhetoric that you hear are, trans people being called pedophiles, groomers, terrorists, being responsible for gun violence, predatory violence, that we're psychotic, that we're perverse, that we're paraphilic, and that we have a character pathology. It's really unfair. None of this has to be true. None of this is true. And so you probably all are not the ones who I need to be speaking to, but I do wonder sometimes if there are people in our profession who align themselves with this view, who pathologize because it's so much what psychiatry has done for decades. And one point is to keep in mind that there's a lot of iatrogenic harm, so that when people come into the hospital or they see you in your private practice, if they feel like you are judging them, that you're scorning them, that you're looking them up and down, that you're being overly intrusive with your questions about their body, about their genitals, etc., it really can be a form of trauma for them. So my experience as a psychoanalytic candidate was really quite traumatic, like I said, and I really feel like there were good people at the institute where I trained, and they just were really ignorant and scared and panicked, and they didn't consult with people they should have consulted with, and then it got left to the younger generation to help me fight that battle. So I'm saying all this to kind of put in your mind that these mistakes can get made and they can cause great harm. And you really want to be cognizant of when you're making those sorts of errors, or if you see a colleague making that sort of error, or your institute. We don't know how many trans psychiatrists are training amongst us right now. We know there's more and more trans and non-binary, but you could have residents or faculty members or fellows in your midst who are kind of suffering through some problem, and they don't know how to raise the problem because of the power structure. So it's really up to all of us to keep that in mind and to try to reach out to our colleagues, and especially our mentees. One of the questions that comes up a lot is, why do they hate us so much? Or, what have we done to them? Or, should I leave? Should I leave the country? Should I stay? I've had this question come up with patients, and a lot of them are kind of tortured around it. And I've had a couple leave, and a couple friends leave, and I've thought about leaving. And I haven't, because every time I do and I start to look into it, I just get very angry and demoralized and sad. So I've decided to stay and fight, for now, at least. So if I need a couch and a safe house, please offer me what you have. My sister told me I might have to get rid of my phone and all of my electronic stuff that tracks me if I have to go on the run, so that could be complicated. Another thing that has happened is that a lot of funding for LGBT-related research has been canceled. The DOJ has put out subpoenas, as you may know, to hospitals that serve trans youth. Many hospitals have shut down their services, And now the DOJ has moved from civil charges to criminal charges, and that recently came out in the news that NYU Langone had received subpoenas on criminal charges. And they're trying to collect medical records of all of their patients, including their psychiatric records and including information about their parents. And it does seem like they really are gearing up to try to press criminal charges. It's terrifying. Another thing that's happening is the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, has been investigating WPATH, the World Professional Association of Trans Health, and the Endocrine Society. And some good news came about last week when Judge Boasberg, who is a federal judge in the District Court of DC, placed an injunction on that investigation. And he found that there was a hostility and animosity as part of those charges. So it's not clear what will happen with that. Hopefully it gets tied up and it doesn't go any further, but it's still an ongoing issue. And it's not clear if shield laws, like New York has shield laws, California, I think Washington, it's not clear if those are going to hold up and protect these providers. I noticed, and a lot of my patients noticed last year when the Charlie Kirk murder occurred in September, that people online were really quick to blame transgender people for that murder. It wasn't a trans person who shot and killed him, as far as we know. And there is this conspiracy theory out there that trans people are somehow responsible for gun violence in this country, which is ludicrous. The research I did, I found that of the 5,748 mass shootings since 2013, that 5 have been committed by transgender people, and 97 by cisgender or non-transgender people. It does seem like we should be focusing on why there's so much violence and so many guns, and not so much on trans people. In the wake of that murder, Nancy Mace, who was a representative from South Carolina, called for the institutionalization of trans people. And Representative Ronnie Jackson of Texas, who used to be the president's physician in his first term, wanted to remove transgender people from the streets and prohibit us from accessing the internet and talking to one another. He said that if we talk to one another, that's a social danger. Well, maybe it is. In a big way. We are engaging in social danger. He also called us a cancer. And I read last week about a gubernatorial candidate in Tennessee named Monty Fritz, who's called for capital punishment for parents and clinicians who provide gender-affirming care to youth. And he's actually really pretty popular in Tennessee. So don't move there. Did I just do that one? No. One thing I keep thinking about, and this is maybe this applies to our society and our culture and also to our consulting room, is why is there such an obsession, or is there an obsession with genitals? It seems like there's a lot of panic and a lot of worry about it, yet we have, for some reason, developed these forms of identification that require us to declare what our genitals are through, the designation of F or M. And I don't know if there's a historian in here, but I don't understand why that's the case. It seems like a huge invasion of privacy. But this is what's been happening, and the passports now, it's very hard. You can't apply for a passport if you're trans, and you can't expect to change your gender marker to your gender identity. I've had 2 or 3 patients who recently applied for a new passport, and their gender marker had been switched back to their assigned sex at birth. And that, automatically outs them, and they can't travel now because they're going to be afraid that they're going to be held or victimized or detained or something. So I also think it's important in your work with patients to be cognizant of, what your fantasies or your imaginations are, or your anxieties about this. Do you find yourself, trying to figure someone out, wondering about their genitals, wondering what's the operation, have they had the operation or not? I think it's natural to wonder about these things and to imagine what our patients are going through, but you have to be really cognizant of why that might be taking place and the impact it might be having on your treatments. Showing me different. Okay, let me just go with this. I know what it's showing.
It's shown on the next slide.
Something also interesting has been happening that's also distressing is there's been an increase in LGBT migration throughout the country as people try to flee to safer borders, safer states. An organization called MAP in June of 2025 last year did a survey, and 9% of their trans adults surveyed had moved to different states. And 5% of the wider LGBTQ adults who were surveyed had also fled to other states. And they calculated or estimated that this would be about 1.5 million refugees within the US. So that's pretty severe if you think about that type of displacement and upheaval in people's lives. Probably some of those people are at least well off enough that it can be a good change for them, while others are probably really struggling, going through a lot of anxiety, a lot of trauma, PTSD, perhaps even homelessness. It's something to keep in mind for your patients. And people are fleeing because they're afraid that they're going to get stuck in a state where they're going to not have an ID, they're going to get killed, they're going to be imprisoned, etc. Although it's not as if going to a blue state automatically is going to be safe. So as I said earlier, I have my own fears and about my own safety and that of my family, and I worry about not being able to travel. Coming here was the first time I've traveled by plane since 2025, and I haven't left the country and don't plan on leaving the country until there's a different person in the White House. Speaking out about these things is a risk to one's career and one's livelihood, and I know people who have gotten death threats. I think we might have someone in the room here who's gone through something like that, and it's pretty horrendous, pretty scary. Makes it really hard to speak up, but we do need to do that. We need to speak up. But it's angering and it's demoralizing. It's depressing. And I didn't particularly want to come here today to do this talk, but now that I'm here, I'm glad to see you all. I'm glad to be giving it. But I'm a little bit like this these days, right? As are my patients. One of the great things about doing this panel or doing things like APA and other organizational psychiatric adventures is that there's a growing number of LGBT psychiatrists and trans and non-binary psychiatrists, and I get to meet a lot of them. And so for us to be getting together and meeting and supporting one another is really important, and we sort of want that to also be, for you all to be part of that as well, and for there to be an allyship amongst all of us. I think that's probably one of the most important things that we can do is to support one another and support our patients. But if we're not supported, then we really can't support our patients. If you know that there are people in your midst who are trans or LGBT and you think they might be suffering, or you just think, wow, they're part of a class of people that's being targeted right now, please check in on them, let them know that you care. It really goes a long way. This is my last slide, okay. So, lastly, be curious, inquire, think. I know you all do, you're all very smart. Keep doing that, keep thinking, keep questioning. Understand your implicit bias and countertransference with your patients and with other people, your colleagues. Wonder why the government is targeting trans people and trans care, what that means for you, and our profession as well. And when is government regulation a form of punishment? Like, we do need government regulation, but it's been weaponized at this point. I have questions about how the APA should respond to the needs of trans and non-binary people right now. And we have to wonder if there's going to be a time when we can do research again, because we need more research on this community. I certainly want it, as someone who's aging, I want to know what's going to happen or what I'm at risk for. But you can't have quality research in an environment like this. Stay informed. Please raise concerns with your local mental health organizations and your local APA. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your time.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great, perfect. There we go. All right, it's good to be here with you all. My name is Lana Irons. I'm an adult psychiatrist, currently working in Brooklyn at SUNY Downstate, but also at both SUNY Downstate and Kings County Hospital. At Kings County Hospital, I'm part of the Domestic Violence Shelter Mental Health Initiative, where I work in domestic violence shelters in Brooklyn and Queens. I'm also the Associate Program Director of the Adult Psychiatry Residency Program at SUNY Downstate right now as well. And in my sort of part of the talk today, I want to sort of talk about when trainees are supported and talk about sort of like a positive story about how to do things right when it comes with trainees, when it comes with people you work with, who happen to be transgender, and sort of how to support them and how to help them grow into sort of competent positions, but also confident ones as well. And so I first want to read a little bit of the beginning part of my story. And so the first part of my story that I want to talk about was prior to my transitioning. When I was in medical school in the mid to late 2010s, pretty far, long time ago sometimes it was like, bright-eyed and wanting to impress my preceptors and my professors, so I could get the honors grade and that good evaluation. I'm not sure what I fully expected going into my clinicals, but an unfortunately common situation I witnessed was the sniggering whispers and the jokes from various staff learners and at times attendings when a patient would be seen who themselves identified outside of their gender assigned at birth. Being a medical student at the time, I felt I didn't have the power to advocate for these patients, frequently leading me to feel helpless myself as these individuals were met with incredulity and derision, which certainly would affect the quality of care that they would have received. It was an all too rare occurrence when the attending would step in to set a tone of respect towards these patients, but luckily there were some who did do this. Frequently, they were the ones who were willing to provide gender-affirming care themselves, even though at the time in Virginia it was a not particularly well-known area of practice that frequently was not covered by insurance. The official curriculum at my medical school at the time often relegated topics of career healthcare sort of to the periphery, maybe one lecture here and there, but did not have any sort of information or did not teach about healthcare for transgender individuals in my recollection. So it really sort of turned to the medical students to kind of teach themselves and to sort of provide that sort of curriculum, because our school did not provide that curriculum. And I think mostly because it's not on standardized tests, and for some reason it's not considered sort of an essential healthcare that I think all physicians should learn about, since they will probably treat these patients in the future. And looking back on that time, looking back on that time now, I felt that there was a broad air of dismissiveness and a lack of concern around sort of this population, which of course, being myself at the time, I was not out at the time, and I had not transitioned yet, certainly affected me pretty broadly, and it wasn't until I became a resident that I did decide to transition. So fast forward to the next chapter in my medical journey, when I became a resident physician. I had matched the SUNY Downstate Adult Psychiatry Residency Program. I truly did not know what was in store for me. I learned the art of my craft as a psychiatrist at Downstate and had the privilege and honor of working in the communities of Central Brooklyn. Something that drew me to this residency was the openness and safety that I felt from my program director, attendings, my program coordinator, and soon my co-residents, chief residents, support staff, and the broader community. I didn't realize at the start, but I would myself have to lean on my program and my institution for support during not only one of the most consequential periods of my professional life, but also one of the most transformative experiences I would personally undergo, so that I could truly be seen by the world in a way that reflected my internal experiences. I made the decision to finally medically transition so that my gender expression could reflect the woman that I am. During this period, the one thing that I can honestly say that made the biggest difference was the advocacy and support from my program leadership, so that my transitioning was not a big deal at all. They ensured that my status as a transgender woman did not at all impede my education, my training, and did not limit my opportunities to also become a chief resident. What an incredible gift that was, to not have to worry that others' dehumanizing perceptions of me would get in the way of my becoming a physician. A gift that I will hold dear to my heart for the rest of my life. During the period I was transitioning, I happened to start around my late end of my second year and beginning of my third year, meaning by the time I was sort of out at work, I already had a panel of outpatients at Kings County Hospital, which is a public hospital in central Brooklyn. Before I officially started transitioning at work, I spoke with my supervisors about the next steps, like how should I approach sort of my patients, because obviously they're going to notice me changing, me dressing differently, that sort of thing. And it was jointly decided that the best way to move forward would be to inform all of my patients before making the change. It's kind of an interesting sort of experience, and sort of in a way, coming out just to kind of let them know. And I remember that the spiel was that I would say is that, hey, just let you know, I will be using a different name coming up, I will be transitioning, so I may look different, I may dress differently, I'll be using she, her pronouns, but your treatment will be the same. You'll still be able to come in, also work together. Any questions? And that was it. Did not even discuss it with any of my patients after that. Wasn't, for the most part, a topic of conversation at all with any of them. Except for occasionally my psychotherapy patients. I remember the story. I had one patient where she actually sometimes would comment on sort of what I would wear, kind of in a supportive way. I remember her saying one time, "Oh, Dr. Irons, beige is not a good color on you." Needless to say, I did not wear beige ever again. After that, she was, I didn't think she was right. Definitely. Reality testing perfect. I remember that when it did come up in other ways, that my supervisors also treated sort of this experience with openness and curiosity. And being in from a very psychodynamic, psychoanalytic program, they sort of saw these sort of transference reactions that would come up, and did not see it as evidence of harm to the patients, but an interesting place to explore in the patient's own therapy, which I think in many ways actually helped out the therapy in a lot of ways, and actually provided some interesting ways that a lot of my patients sort of explored their own sort of sense of who they are as people, their own sort of expression of gender, their own expectations that they sort of grew up with, that sort of thing, or they reflected what they wanted. And so the experience of being seen as a person beyond my transition, during my training, I believe, changed the trajectory of my career, as well as my perceptions of myself and my patients. It built my sense of confidence and instilled in me a sense of purpose around medical education, leading me to excitedly accept the position of APD for my former residency program. It has also driven my passion to not only provide the best medical care I can for my patients, regardless of any factor or status, but also seeing them as they are, seeing with them, learning from them, and trusting that they understand their experiences, respecting their autonomy as a fellow human being, or provide my expertise to help guide them to reach their goals in life. I learned that there's an invigorating power in a physician taking the time to truly understand the needs of their patients and not allowing societal biases and minoritizing beliefs to get in the way of treating those seeking my help. And so it was a really good experience, I would have to say. Like I've been very, I think, honestly, very privileged to have had that experience as a trainee, to really have had the support. And it's one of the reasons why I'm here today, because I want other people to have that experience as well. And I'm hoping there are attendings, training directors, other people here, maybe future ones, who I hope can take what was said here and really sort of take it to heart that this doesn't have to be a big deal. The only reason it becomes a big deal is if we sort of make it a big deal. This could just be a normal part of everyday life. Okay, So I want to, being that I'm very much into medical education, I'm part of my sort of GME at my institution as well, I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what to do, how to do things right. And so talking about psychological safety, my position, so the definition of psychological safety originally was defined by Edmondson in 1999, which is a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Aspects including shared perceptions amongst team members as to whether they believe that others will not reject members for being themselves. Team members care about each other as individuals. Team members have positive intentions to one another. And team members respect the competence of others. And so kind of moving that, because that was more so in like sort of organizational psychology, moving into an educational environment, we sort of see this is sort of like education safety, where the absence of the need to constantly self-monitor, allowing learners to fully focus on learning in the moment. And so kind of a little bit more with just so I'll sort of describe this a little more, the subjective state of feeling free from a sense of judgment by others, such that learners can authentically and wholeheartedly concentrate on engaging with the learning task without perceived need to self-monitor their projected image. Something that I luckily was able to experience as a trainee, and something that I think really helped me sort of really be able to just focus on my clinical work and on my education. So what are some leadership behaviors? And I would say that my program director, Dr. Scott McAfee, he, I think, really demonstrated a lot of these. Specifically, this idea of inclusiveness, support, trustworthiness, openness, and behavioral integrity. If he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. His words and his actions aligned, and he was inclusive, supportive. He was somebody I could trust with sort of what was going on in my life and know that it was held. He's somebody who I later found out, after I told him that I was planning on transitioning, gone to the heads of clinical services, had gone to sort of departments and sort of talked with all of them before I would go on and say, hey, this is happening. It's not a big deal. Like, we support her. Just really sort of early on making sure, and just not letting it be reactive, but being very proactive in his approach and making sure that I was supported. And so what are the benefits of sort of psychological safety? There's been and a lot of this research has been very sort of well documented and validated. You have increased team member engagement, job satisfaction, productivity, effectiveness, and reduced turnover. Foster belief that individuals can bring their true selves to work. There has been found to be a stronger benefit for racial minority team members compared to white majority team members. And also fosters a willingness to disclose gaps in knowledge during feedback sessions, increases reception to feedback as well. So all in all, both from the learner side, but also the team side, it promotes team cohesion and can make it better for all teams. And I want to point out that this is just not for trans people, this could be for all people. This isn't something that, and I think especially it's particularly helpful for those who are minoritized, who do have sort of minority identities that may be sort of not sort of related to the majority sort of experience. Identity safety, where identity threat is counter-eliminated. It's going to include sort of stereotype threat, racism, sexism, ableism, microaggressions, all those things. The lack of that promotes identity safety. And I wanted to sort of zoom in a little bit on stereotype threats, sort of related to my own experience. And so what is stereotype threat? Defined as still at all, when a negative stereotype about a group that one is part of becomes personally relevant, usually as an interpretation of one's behavior or an experience one is having. Stereotype threat is the resulting sense that one can then be judged or treated in terms of the stereotype, or that one might do something that would inadvertently confirm it. And sort of with this, and this also comes from a lot of sort of research around sort of this fear of being perceived in a certain way and how it can sort of drive behavior. How sort of this experience of sort of say trans people as being sort of deviant or that sort of thing, but also as being like harmful to patients, can lead to like this lack of risk taking, could also lead to this sort of threat of feeling not wanting to be stereotyped and sort of avoiding certain situations, certain places, certain ways of sort of learning because you're sort of scared of that. And inadvertently sometimes there's been some good research around this about how sort of stereotype threat can end up inadvertently leading to some of those behaviors and happening in the person as they're trying to prevent the person from noticing the behaviors. There's some interesting sort of psychological research around this. So kind of thinking about sort of types that within the realm of specifically transgender women, to talk about my own personal experiences, there's this sort of idea of transgender women are artificial, plain at being female. That a trans woman's gender expression being seen as deliberate rather than natural, especially in the beginning of transition. Being a transgender women are deliberately female, not naturally female. But in honesty, and this is something that I've learned as I've sort of worked and I've grown, and currently I work with mostly women at this time in my own clinical practice, is that this is the process of sort of knowing oneself and how one's comfortable in their own expression is a universal process that all women sort of experience from a young age. Mostly they sort of go through a lot of that in their teenage years, these awkward sort of teen years, that sort of thing. You might see a trans woman sort of going through that a little bit later in life, but even then, over the years, women often play with femininity and masculinity throughout their lives. It's not something that is sort of specific to one time period. So I'm going to move from there, be assertive and firm in argumentation. There is that aspect which I'm sure, which can be both seen as both masculine for a woman, but for a trans woman, just an expression of their supposed real gender. And keeping on going here, choice of feminine expression as well can be sort of perceived as non-authentic and that sort of thing as well, whereas it might just be that trans woman just liked that sort of color or that sort of dress or that sort of way of expressing themselves. I'm sort of speeding through this in the interest of time. So fostering identity safety, agency to serve. So what happens when we foster this? Witnessing the positive impacts of their own identities as they leverage these identities to help patients, upholding personhood, experiencing those efforts to get to know them on an individual level and being seen for their personal complexity rather than a single identity. When someone feels accepted for their full selves, and when they see others with shared identities, that can promote belonging. And I think belonging is something that I hope that everyone in our field can experience, and as well as our patients. And so briefly with my story now, I've already mentioned, I've had the opportunity over the past couple of years to work with a clinical team of all women, which has been a wonderful experience. It's been an experience that I think has been really transforming the way I both perceive myself. A lot of the work that I do is with sort of women who've experienced domestic violence, who've experienced terrible violence in their lives, some men as well, but mostly women, and sort of hearing their stories, but also hearing and empathizing with aspects of their story that I think can also reflect a universal experience of womanhood, of sort of feeling that the identity of being a woman is something that is, you always sort of construct, and it sometimes can be really broken down through pain and trauma and harm. But it's something that I think I've seen in my patients. It's something that I've had a lot of joy in sort of helping people find themselves again and sort of being able to empathize in that way. And it's one of those things that I've been really very proud of in my career, that I can kind of give back to the women who also gave to me and accepted me and let me be myself. And so, thank you. That's my
My name is Tobias Murphy. I do telehealth, psychiatry, and I'll happily talk to you about how wonderful that is, but that's for another time. I see adult patients, and I have no disclosures. So my goals today are to first start with my personal story as a transgender psychiatrist and individual. I will make it less about the current social climate because my colleagues have done such a wonderful job and we need to speed along. And then outline the effect on trans mental health of this climate and discuss best practices for caring for transgender patients. So this slide, I come from Huntington, West Virginia. I live there now. This is a beautiful crosswalk that they call the Jewel because we're called the Jewel City for various reasons. We'll get into that later, not during this talk. But this is by a wonderful transgender artist called Sassa Wilkes. Sadly, as of January 2025, we're no longer able to maintain this. The new mayor, the new administration means we're not going to paint it over, but you can't keep it up. So this is a sort of visualization for the story I'm about to tell. There we go. So this is a story that applies to me, maybe not all transgender people, but I think it might be a good sort of a tale that would set the scene. Being a transgender child is like walking with a diamond in your shoe. You are always aware that it is there. At first, you try to take it out and show the world. You think it is beautiful and precious. I'm also a crier, despite testosterone, so bear with me. Darn you, testosterone. At first, you try to take it out and show the world. You think it is beautiful and precious, but when you do this, people are shocked and embarrassed. They act as if it is shameful. So you put the diamond back into your shoe and you keep walking. You learn to hide it and walk with it. You try your best to avoid any sign of a limp or a shift in your posture. After all, adults are unkind and unforgiving when your mannerisms don't exactly match their expectations. Although it is precious, the hardness of the diamond against your foot means that you develop abrasions. By the time you are a teenager, the abrasions become deepening wounds. Hiding the diamond becomes increasingly painful. By the time you're an adult, you have a deep hole in the sole of your foot. It becomes progressively more difficult to act as if it isn't there. Signs that you are different become harder to ignore. At some point, the pain becomes unbearable. What was once a flesh wound becomes an infection that reaches the bone and blood. What was once precious, remaining hidden, becomes life-threatening. The infection becomes septic, not because the diamond is a problem, but because keeping it secret has caused you harm. At some point in the journey, whether as a child, teenager, or adult, you realize that this situation is not sustainable. The choice, quite honestly, becomes get better or die. Accept reality or be done in by its avoidance. The only pathway to health is to remove the diamond from your shoe, to find a way to believe that the jewel you now wear on your finger is not a source of shame, but something to celebrate and even paint in the middle of your town. This is the best analogy I have yet found to describe what it is to be transgender in my experience. I used to describe it as having a pebble in your shoe, but a pebble will wear down. And this is what people will hope will happen to us over time. That if you hide it long enough, it will wear to dust. That getting rid of it will be as simple as tipping the dust out of your shoe. But the pathology isn't being transgender. What harms is the pain of having to hide, as well as how you are treated once you become visible. In my opinion, the reason that transgender people come to a point where they have no choice but to transition is the shame and self-hatred that becomes unbearable. Only one choice remains: do I choose to accept that I am a good person and that it is okay to be myself, or do I let the pain kill me? Oops, there we go. Personally, the most shocking thing I experienced after starting my transition in 2023 at the ripe age of 43 was that I suddenly felt invisible. I was halfway through my first fellowship. I say first for a reason. The pain of hiding had become too great, and there was nothing I could do but admit how I was feeling and what being healthy looked like to me. So I cut my hair and I changed the way I dressed. I showed up to work finally looking like myself. There were only 3 attendings in my program. The first was the director, my mentor. I explained my situation to him, and he appeared silently horrified. One day soon after, I arrived to serve in the clinic of the second attending in the program. He appeared surprised that I was actually there. He would not let me remain and said that I need not return. He dismissed me without telling me why. He told me to ask my mentor for an explanation. The medical students rotating in his clinic that day remained, as did the residents. I was the only fellow in my program, and I was not permitted entry. This attending wouldn't answer my emails. He would not agree to a meeting to discuss the problem. I was just shut out. The third attending wrote me an email sharing his impression that I was not dedicated to the program and needed to ask myself why I was there. I was driving 4.5 hours each way and spending the week away from my family, so pretty dedicated. I then went to speak to HR, and the woman I spoke to was reassuring and seemed sensitive to my plight. She said she would speak to the chair of the department on my behalf and get back to me. When she called me back to her office a few days later, her manner had completely changed. All she would say with a new coldness in her expression was that the attendings in the department had said that I was the one who was the problem. My attendings, including the one who had shut me out, were now requiring that I go on a fellow improvement program. And if anybody knows what that is, you know you would have to put that on every licensing, all the applications you do from there on out, with no real ability to explain why. And the HR employee would not answer any follow-up questions. She said that it was not possible for me to speak to the program director or chair directly to elevate my concerns. I would just be considered more of a problem. My impression was that this would only increase the retribution against me. The gift and the curse of being a psychiatrist is being able to read very subtle changes in affect. I saw fear in the eyes of that HR person and those of my attendings. I left my program because the treatment became too demeaning to tolerate. So, I switched programs. I returned to my hometown program that had developed me as a medical student and as a resident. I explained to my chair that I was transgender and that I would be, transitioning upon my return. And of course, at first, you're getting a fellow, great. She was very supportive. They were very supportive. You're not going to find out who this is. I returned to the program that had trained me. My chosen name and pronouns were announced by leadership. I thought that was a very nice way to do it. They sent out an email to the faculty, the chair saying that they had my full support and to please respect the change. Some of the residents who had trained with me signaled no support. Others wouldn't look at me or talk to me. And it was the same with the medical students I had helped train in psychiatry rotations. Before transition as a resident, I had taught lectures in transgender mental health. At the time, I had been asked questions like, who are you to care about this or teach this? Or how is being transgender any different from being psychotic? In the second attempt at fellowship, there were attendings I had trained with as a resident who wouldn't look at me, say my name, or use any pronouns to refer to me. I was invisible to the people who were supposed to train me. The same instructors who had been warm when I had previously worked with them, both as a medical student and as a resident. The most hurtful interaction was with an attending who had been very supportive of me in my medical judgment, both as a medical student in third-year psychiatry rotation and throughout my residency. They had been a good mentor to me. After coming out, however, I felt there was no faith in me as a physician. And sadly, patient care was the victim of this lack of trust. I could accept being invisible myself. I could not accept this being the plight of my patients. I could not accept that they were left to suffer because I was not worthy of being seen. After an especially belittling interaction with this attending, I made it very clear that they would never again have faith in my abilities. I chose to leave the program, my second fellowship. It would be great to say I've completed 2 fellowships. That would be pretty baller, right? But I left 2 after halfway being through. I won't get into particulars, but in essence, I refused to serve in a situation in which being dismissed meant that multiple patients' lives were at stake. And this time period was one of the darkest of my life. I decided to leave behind my dreams of being an academic psychiatrist behind me. It would have been nice. And I spent the next months looking for my first job as an attending. There was a dearth of psychiatrists in my area, West Virginia. I didn't think I would have trouble finding a job. I applied to several openings, and the progression was always the same. Step 1, they declare, we are so excited. The position has been open forever. There aren't enough local candidates, and we can't get anyone to move here. Step 2, I send in my application, which includes listing multiple former names, a birth name and 2 married names. Step 3, they reply to my application along the lines of, so sorry, the job has actually been taken. The most extreme example of this was a health system that was in urgent need of 6 psychiatrists. I joked at the time what a fortunate windfall this was, to be able to suddenly fill all 6 positions. Finally, after about 6 months of searching, I found an inpatient job. I was very open about being transgender this time, would rather them know at the outset. I was told although they try to treat everyone the same, some people here are very religious. Great, I joked, I'm religious too. I had no choice though to leave this job after 2 months. Many staff members, again, wouldn't look at me. My efforts to kindly advocate for the appropriate treatment of transgender patients seemed to start a whisper campaign against me. Things had quickly turned from kind to cold once the staff met me in person. I was told after 2 months that I had made a bad first impression, and it was unlikely that I would ever be able to dig out of it. I offered 3 months' notice. I was asked to stay for only 1 more week. But there is good news, friends. I am currently, as I said, they have a booth. Please stop by. I have a profile online that identifies me as a transgender man and allows patients to select their preference for an LGBT supportive provider. Patients who prefer a psychiatrist with this additional training, I can indicate its preference on signing up. There has been no sense of being treated differently than any applicant to the job, and I have felt treated as any other clinician. And they have been incredibly supportive of me and LGBTQ plus patients, including transgender, gender diverse patients. This is my family. If I start making dinosaur sounds, it helps me not to cry. That's what I got, guys. That's what I got. All right. Professionally, I have found solace in telepsychiatry. I'm called Sir, Man, and Brother. I don't know if this is the progression of my transition or if telehealth hides some of the subtleties of my voice and appearance, or both. I had a very transgender, angry person who said, "You're a good man, doc," but also talked in the same visit about how all these people think they're gender these days. In my personal life, I'm happy and fulfilled. Testosterone should be more help right now. I am blessed to have a spouse and children who love and support me. My spouse is here, but I won't point her out. I am speaking to you today as a colleague, as a kind-hearted person, as a parent, as a psychiatrist. Why did I write these words? As this lover of stupid comedy and knitting, as a person, as a human, I'm proud of who I've become. I'm proud of my patients. Speaking to thousands of patients in my career has taught me that, in essence, people are truly good. I believe firmly that the good will win out. It is just a matter of time and trust and advocacy. And I think I can blitz through the rest of it. My voice is cracking, but essentially here's one example of a bill that luckily failed that would, despite evidence-based and best practices supporting gender-affirming care, it would make it a crime, a felony, subject to imprisonment and not exceeding life, and these are the sorts of things we're facing. Per every major medical organization, transgender people are not mentally ill, and transgender care is life-saving. A recent study found that legislative debate of anti-transgender bills had led to an increase in suicidality and belonging and support, as I'm very lucky to have in my professional personal life now, are preventive against suicide, and this can decrease reported suicidal thoughts by 39% and attempts by 59% per one study in my references. Again, it's been very beautifully pointed out by my colleagues, best practices. When in doubt, remember the most basic elements of your training. I had to tell medical students, you know how to treat a patient, just treat the patient. Presenting problem, etc. Remember beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. In supportive therapy, explore the effect of the current climate on their mental health. Even just listening is huge because for a lot of people, no one will listen. Treat the presenting problem and think through the full patient experience. How do they contact you? How does the front desk staff treat them? All the way to the doctor. There are patients who throughout get treated badly, including being dismissed by the doctor that they had to wait many months for. So that is the end of my talk. I made it through it. Thank you so much. And thank you to Jack for being such an ally and for coordinating this. We appreciate you.
Thank you. I was having a thought as everyone spoke about an experience I had, I think 30 years ago in New York City, they had the Gay Pride Parade, and the gay doctors in New York decided to march down, and it was like, a really strange experience. I don't know if you've seen the New York Pride Parade. It would come down Fifth Avenue, and then it would hit Washington Square Park, and then suddenly from a wide promenade, you're in the middle of this very crowded, narrow street, Washington Square Park North, and suddenly the crowd is on top of you, and I had a moment of cognitive dissonance thinking, coming out, I was expecting to be like attacked, and yet everybody is cheering. So do you think these guys and girls deserve a standing ovation? And testosterone doesn't stop you from crying. So we have a few more minutes left. If anybody has any questions and comments, I think we have a standing microphone over there.
Hello, thank you all for sharing your stories and vulnerability today. I think they can a lot of things for hope. My question is certainly a hypothetical one for a trainee who earlier in this talk was mentioned an executive order that would put a lot of new rules into place. There was another executive order that was put into place within a short time period of similar effects that put a trainee into a place that they had a choice in order to stay in the training role that they're in, and the institution that they're working for needed to step back into a glass closet, if you will. And this trainee decided to stay, but is also facing a lot of moral injury, treating a population in which rendering a certain diagnosis would also be career-ending for the patients that they're working with. I was wondering if you had any advice for this particular situation.
So just to clarify, what was the diagnosis?
Gender dysphoria.
Gender dysphoria, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one because I believe that there was a Supreme Court decision that did put in workplace protections for trans people in like the early 2020s, actually, sort of related to some ongoing sort of stuff there. But I think there is sort of laws having a state level, but also stuff on the federal level around not sort of enforcing these things. It's a tough call. It really, I think, I always sort of put it under sort of patient-centered care. What does the patient want in this case? Like fully understanding and making sure that they sort of know what's going on, what's happening, or what's the risks involved. I mean, in that case, if there is a worry about sort of losing their job, I mean, also sort of even exploring as a psychiatrist, whether therapy relates to that sort of thing, about sort of what are their plans for the future in regards to sort of transition, that sort of thing. What does that look like? Kind of safety planning in a way. Is that something that I would do? Sort of what would happen if you were to start transitioning, you got this diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and then you were to get fired or you would lose your job for whatever reason. Like what, just sort of really exploring that, because I understand that there is this and making sure that they get the care that they need, but also making sure that they're sort of in a way of sort of like benefits risks and sort of really helping them understand. And I think this is why it's imperative on providers to sort of know all the sort of facets of a person's life, but also all the risks and also the societal sort of issues that might happen. Same thing with sort of any sort of stigmatizing diagnosis as well, just sort of being really aware of that and being sort of thoughtful about sort of how it's shared, where it's documented, that sort of thing. And it's really person dependent, but I would take a patient-centered approach.
Thank you all so much for being here and speaking today. My question might be kind of obliquely related to some of your talks, but I couldn't help but notice what seems to me like an overrepresentation of an interest in psychoanalysis in this group.
Not psychoanalysis.
Not everyone, but like relative to APA as a whole or psychiatry in the US. And I was just curious if you think that that's maybe a signal of something, or like the particular relationship in this moment when psychoanalysis is maybe having a little bit of a mini renaissance, what the relationship between different kinds of socially conscious or like gender diversity oriented ways of practicing mental health care are, and psychoanalysis.
I hadn't thought of that, but that's an interesting question. I don't know, what the connection is. I mean, I always wanted to, well, when I was in training in psychiatry, I just liked talking to patients, and it seemed there was more I could do with that than medication. And I found, some of the evidence around medication a little bit lacking, or that the relationship with patients when I was providing medication was very different. And I wanted something very different. But maybe there is something to be said about the imagination and creativity. Not to say that prescribers are not imaginative or creative, because I know they are, but maybe there's more of it coming into the treatments that are more psychotherapeutic, psychodynamically oriented. I don't know if I can say that trans people are more imaginative. I don't want to make that conclusion.
It also might be the fact that at least 3 of us are from the New York area, and New York City is a very psychodynamically oriented city. A lot of the psychiatry departments have a large sort of over-representation of psychoanalysts, that sort of thing, and so it was just part of training. I would have to say on my side that I started working with I'm in psychoanalysis right now. I started working with my analyst, and before I transitioned, and a big part of my work with her has been sort of the transition and sort of how she's been approaching with a very sort of open mind and that sort of thing, only really explore what it means to me, my own personal experiences. And I think it's been an essential part of sort of how I've grown to understand myself as well. And so I would recommend it to anybody. It can be sort of hard to get and it can be expensive depending on who you go to and that sort of thing. But I think that it's an inherently reflective process when you're trying to understand your identity. It's an inherently self-reflective process that you have to do in a very deep way, I find. It's because there's a lot of deconstructing, because the world starts perceiving you differently. They start sort of seeing you different from what you've ever been, and of course it's all very different if you transitioned as a much younger, but as an adult, I found that a big part of that is sort of aligning how I perceive myself, how the world perceives me, and having that all aligned together, and the work in the process of that has been sort of a large portion of how my transition has been. The physical stuff is the physical stuff, but I think there's a lot of work that I've done personally that I think was important for me to do in order to feel confident and feel like I am more myself. And so that's what I would have to say.
I would just add, so I'm currently disclosing, I'm the acting executive director of the William Allenson White Psychoanalytic Institute in New York. When I applied for analytic training in the 1980s, none of the mainstream analytic institutes in New York City would accept an openly gay candidate, which is why I went to my institute. I would say that psychoanalysis is a tool, and that the psychoanalytic organizations have used tools in repressive ways, despite the potentially liberatory ways psychoanalysis can be employed. So it's not about whether psychoanalysis is a good or bad thing, it's really how you use it. And so I can speak from personal experience. I think it can be used in many productive ways, and there's some people who use it in rather repressive ways.
That was session 1240 from the American Psychiatric Association's annual meeting in San Francisco. A session that was not recorded for virtual attendees. A session you were not meant to hear. If you have not yet listened to session 1, session 1193, that episode is available now wherever you listen to Informed Dissent. Work like this takes significant resources. Journalism takes time, verification takes time, production takes time. We're providing you this content without a paywall because we believe it belongs to everyone who needs it. Patients, parents, clinicians, and the people making decisions that will shape the lives of children for generations. If you believe that too, and you are in a position to support it, please consider becoming a paid subscriber to Informed Dissent or to the LGB Courage Coalition Substack. Your support makes it possible for those who cannot pay to still hear what they need to hear. You can also follow our work and contribute at lgbcourage.org. And, as always, stay informed and ready to dissent.